If you would please help me welcome Ken the Bug Guy.
First, I want to say, don't let Justin go before the speaker, because then he just ruins the speech, you know. I'm not a good speaker, so you'll have to excuse me if my English is bad, and I stop every once in a while and go, oh, well, where was I at? I like bugs, but I'm not a real good public speaker. But what I've decided to talk about today are some of the things people ask me every day in email. A lot of people want to know how to care for their tarantulas. They want to know how to care for water bugs. I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to go through some other issues. At the end of every round of stuff I'm talking about, I'll let everybody ask questions, and then we'll move on to the next subject. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is tarantula care. One of the things that I think that a lot of people ask me is, you know, they get really wrapped up in, you know, my humidity isn't right, or am I keeping it warm enough, am I keeping it cold enough? Tarantulas are one of the easiest pets you can have out there. You know, you got to think about a human. A human can be in these certain conditions, and that's what they're going to thrive in. But they can also be in a wide variety of conditions also and survive just fine too. Tarantulas, the same thing. And they're a lot simpler than we are. People say, you know, my humidity isn't high enough. That's not going to usually kill your tarantula. We don't even have humidity gauges on anything in our shop. We moisten the substrate for every one of our tarantulas every week. We don't even use a water dish. If something looks like it's getting dehydrated, we'll put a water dish in there. Rarely happens. There's a few species that have very high humidity, like T. blondie. But other than those, you know, watering once a week is going to be plenty. I wouldn't sit there and just, you know, tear it yourself over trying to get your humidity levels exactly perfect or anything like that. Another things with tarantulas, people ask how often do I feed them? Am I eating too much? You can feed them as little or as much as you want, except for, you know, I mean, there is a limit. You know, you want to feed them probably once a week, at least a couple crickets. If they don't want to eat them, it's not a big deal. A lot of people freak out because my tarantula hasn't eaten in 3 weeks. That is not an issue at all. Just take the crickets out every time you feed them. If they haven't eaten them within an hour, take them out and let them, and then put them in a few days later and see if they're hungry again. They might be wanting to shed. They might just be full. There's lots of reasons they might not eat right now. I've seen a tarantula go up 9 months to a year without eating. Survived, it shed, or did something that usually got it to start eating again, and it was perfectly fine. Some other care tips for tarantulas. People always want to put them in these big cages. It's a big no-no. Tarantulas in the wild, they don't have big elaborate cages. They're usually in a little hole about yay big, that big around, and they live most of their life in that little hole. So, especially when it comes to slings, a lot of people will put them in something even this big. This is way too big for a baby tarantula. For one, it's not going to be able to find the food you put in there very easy, because they sit there and wait. They don't go out looking for their food. They're going to wait until that little tiny cricket comes by. It's going to be harder for you to keep any type of humidity in a large container like this. And babies really need the humidity because they're going to be shedding a lot and stuff like that. So don't oversize your container for your tarantula, and don't think you're torturing it because you got a container that's too small. There's really 2 types of tarantulas. There's ones that have the high humidity, and there's ones that tend to be okay in the drier environments. All of them need water. It doesn't matter if it's a desert tarantula or not, it still needs water. A small water dish is fine if you have a small collection. If you don't, you can spray the substrate. I recommend doing it once a week at least. If you've got a very high humidity required tarantula, just twice a week is usually good enough. Like I said, you don't have to sit there and worry about the humidity levels. Anybody have any questions over taking care of their tarantulas that they want to get answered? Yes?
What kind of substrate do you like to use? Did you say that?
I use the ground cocoa. There's a few different kinds you can use. I've found that it's cheap, it works, it's sterile. You can buy it in most pet shops. So it's the easiest thing for me to recommend for people is you can go into any Petco, PetSmart, reptile shop, and they're going to have some ground cocoa, Eco Earth, or the Exoterra brand. And that's what we use. Another thing I want to point out with tarantulas is if you ever see it on its back, don't touch it. If you touch it while it's on its back, you're probably going to hurt it. It's trying to shed. I've had so many people tell me, my tarantula keeps turning over, and when I keep turning it back over, I don't know what's wrong with it. And they end up killing their tarantula because they've interrupted their shedding process, and that's a very important time not to touch your tarantula during the shedding. Another thing I wanted to go over is diseases tarantulas can have. People are always worried about their tarantula being sick. There's not a lot of research into diseases that tarantulas can have, but there are a couple things that I know of off the top of my head that you will see. Nematoids is the biggest thing in the hobby, the tarantula hobby, that people freak out about. If they hear their tarantulas have nematoids, they just freak out that their whole collection is going to get it. They don't spread that fast. They can spread. If you get a tarantula with nematoids, it's a white mass around their mouth. It's usually barely moving. You can barely see it because they're tiny, tiny, tiny worms. If you ever see that, definitely get it away from your collection. Don't use that cage again, or clean the cage very thoroughly. But that is, it's not going to spread to your whole collection usually, and as long as your collection's clean and they're not touching each other or something. Another thing is dehydration is another big thing that tarantulas die from. Somebody didn't water it for 5 weeks. That's going to kill almost any tarantula. I mean, they do need water. Even one that lives in the desert, a lot of people think they don't need water, they still need water. They come from the desert, they usually live underground where it's a little cooler. Usually there's some water sources around that they can get to sometimes, as dew in the morning, things like that. But if any more questions on tarantulas? Yes?
What do you recommend for burrowing substrate?
We use the same thing. The brown cocoa, they usually will burrow around that. A lot of times we help with our burrows in our shop. We'll put in like a plastic container and kind of bury it mostly, and so they can get inside that plastic container. Or we'll take a plant pot, cut it in half, a plastic plant pot, cut it in half, and put it in there, bury it a little bit, and make a little cave out down in there. And a lot of times, blondies love those. They like to get down in there where there's a lot of moisture underneath there, and it holds in the humidity for them. Next one I was going to talk about is scorpion care. There's really two types of scorpions. You've got the wet scorpions, you've got the dry scorpions. The dry scorpions really don't like water. Something I learned the hard way in the beginning of the hobby is if you water your desert harries or your death stalkers or your bicolors, if you water them even a little sometimes, the humidity will kill them sometimes overnight. Once a year, the death stalkers and the bicolors, you can wet aside. The same with the desert harries. It usually helps them to shed. That'd be about it. You don't want to have the humidity levels get too high inside that container. Scorpions are even easier than tarantulas. They're just a cricket or two a week. A lot of times they will stop eating because scorpions actually fill up a lot faster and they store their food a lot longer. So a couple crickets a week. If they stop eating, just stop feeding them for a little while. If they get really fat, stop feeding them for a little while. There's no reason for them to be huge and fat. There's not a lot of diseases anybody knows about on scorpions. I've never even, I know they get nematoids. I've never even heard of somebody having an outbreak of nematoids with scorpions. Never seen any type of disease in scorpions that people have identified. So, is there anything anybody wants to talk about scorpions or wanted to know about scorpions? Yes?
Do you have to take out the crickets like you do with the tarantulas or anything?
Yeah, it's always a good idea to take your crickets out. I mean, even with reptiles, you probably shouldn't leave crickets in there. It can stress the animal out, running around on them. And sometimes crickets, when they get hungry, they'll try to munch on your animal. I mean, I suggest with reptile, bug, whatever you put the crickets in, just take them out if they're not eating them. Also, some things can get desensitized to having crickets around all the time. They need that like short movement that the crickets do, and if they see that all the time, sometimes they won't. They'll stop eating, and they don't recognize that as a cricket. So it's just a good idea. If something's not eating it, take it out. Try again later.
How long do you leave in the crickets, for like an hour or two, or a day?
For the bugs, yeah, about an hour is
Okay.
plenty. I mean, if they're hungry, they're going to grab it. Unless you've got a huge container and that cricket's never even gone by. But if the bug is hungry, as soon as that cricket goes by, it's going to grab it. If it doesn't, then it's just not interested right now. Yes?
What size habitat for, say, a medium to a large scorpion?
For scorpions, well, it actually depends on the type. Some of them, like a desert hairy, I mean, they'll dig burrows up to 6 feet. So a nice big tub with deep substrate, they'd love that. Do you have to have that? No. I mean, most people keep them in a little aquarium. I would say your large scorpions, at least a 5-gallon aquarium. Like the desert hairy or an emperor scorpion, 5-gallon aquarium. Your smaller scorpions, maybe yay big, you know, it doesn't have to be really huge. Your burrowers a lot of times like to make really deep burrows and really intricate burrows, so the larger the cage, the happier they're going to be, and they're going to be able to make those neat burrows. Anyways, one thing I suggest with scorpions that we came up with is if you want to see your scorpion, cover your cage with black paper, put something in the center, and then put the substrate around that, so that when the scorpions dig their tunnels, they dig them around the edges, sort of like an ant farm. Then when you want to look and see your scorpion, you pick up that black paper, and there he is inside of his little burrow up against the cage glass, because you forced him out to the edges. And keeping the paper down makes him feel comfortable going down and making his burrows down in there. So, any other scorpions? Yes.
And if you're dry species, what do you recommend for a good burrowing substrate without having to worry about collapse?
That's actually been really a challenge for us also. What we've been using is, it's something you buy at the pottery shop. It's a kind of sand. No, I have to get back to you on that one. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll remember it before the end. If you come up to me after the speech, I'll remember it and I'll tell you what it is. But you can mix it with the sand and it actually holds its structure better. It's practically the same stuff I think that they're selling in the Petco's and stuff that is that molding kind of sand. I think it's similar to that, but we actually go get the actual sand there. Just bought at pottery shops. I just can't remember the name of it right this second. Anybody else? Yes?
If you have a dry scorpion, do you want to put a little bit of water in it so it can drink it?
You know, biggest thing is if you're going to put any water in with the scorpion, make sure you have a lot of ventilation if it's a dry species, because the humidity is what seems to be what kills them. So if you're you put a little water cap or something in it, it's not horrible, especially because if the scorpion does get thirsty, you can go get a drink. But just make sure that you've got lots of holes in your containers so that the humidity doesn't get built up in there and it doesn't bother your scorpion.
By lots of holes, would a screen top on a 5-gallon aquarium be enough ventilation?
That would be plenty. A lot of people put them in plastic containers like this, and at that point you want holes all around it because it's not, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get your ventilation. The aquariums, actually a lot of people have a hard time keeping humidity levels up inside aquariums because all of it escapes to those screens, and they have a wide lid, so. Yes?
How long did it live?
Oh, it ranges. I mean, the emperor scorpion is about 7 years, I believe, 7 to 10. A lot of them live at least a few years. I think most of them are probably at least 3 to 4 years. Some of them up to 10 years. And I'm sure that there are some that might even live longer. I don't know as much about ages on scorpions as I do tarantulas, but I know that all of them live a pretty decent amount of time. Yes?
We learned a few months back that poison dart frogs kept in captivity aren't poisonous. Are scorpions any more or less poisonous in captivity dependent on their feed or anything else?
Not that anybody knows of. One of the things with scorpions and tarantulas is there's not a lot of people testing venom levels. We've got venom levels on some stuff, and we've got, sting reports and bite reports that help us to differentiate which ones are really bad and which ones aren't. But a lot of this stuff doesn't have venom level research, so we don't even know what the levels are to begin with. It goes into captivity, and who knows if it's worse or better. But all of them still have venom in captivity. I mean, all of them still hurts in some sense. I mean, emperor scorpions and dude scorpions being kind of at the lower end of the scale. But they still do hurt. I mean, I got stung by an emperor scorpion, and it itched. It hurt for about 15 minutes. It itched and was sore like a bruise, and it was about 2 days of that, and it bruised all around where it stung me. Wasn't anything that was like the end of the world or anything, but it still hurt.
Another question. I don't know anyone who keeps a tarantula that doesn't handle it. Do you do the same for a scorpion if you have a scorpion, or what's your recommendation on?
There's only one type of scorpion that actually there's a couple. There's the flat rock and there's the emperor. Those are the only two that especially if you're gonna let your kids hold them, that are totally those are the safe ones. They usually are never gonna try to sting you.
Did you just get bitten by an emperor?
No.
Oh, it was an emperor.
I have gotten stung by an emperor, but it's been a couple of years, I think, since I was stung by that one. But
Mild enough to sting, you're not gonna have a kid.
it's going to be like a bee sting. An emperor sting is going to be like a bee sting, and everybody reacts slightly different. So just because to me it's a bee sting, you never know when their arm's going to swell up or something. I've heard some cases, in rare cases, where people do have a worse reaction. Dying or anything like that? No, I've never even heard anybody gone to the hospital for an emperor sting. But I have heard some people say, "Oh, my hand swelled up," or "half of my arm swelled up where it stung me."
So any other species you wouldn't recommend handling?
No, just because you're most likely going to get stung. Also, another thing with bugs, I know some reptiles actually, like bearded dragons, they're excited to get out sometimes. Bugs don't really care. If they're letting you hold them, it's because they just don't see you as a threat. They don't want to come out of their cage. In fact, they don't feel comfortable outside of their home. So you holding them, it's not the end of the world. If they're not biting you or anything, it means they don't see you as a threat and they're not incredibly uncomfortable. But at the same time, they're not enjoying it. It's for your enjoyment if you're holding bugs. Any other questions on those? Yes.
What's the general temperature range?
Oh, I forgot to say that. For both, I mean, most of your bugs are 65 to 85 are comfortable. Our shop year-round, wintertime, we get down to 72. Summertime, we get up to 85. We don't ever have any types of deaths because of temperatures in the shop. Those are just really nice ranges. And the extremes, if you're going to get up to 90 because for some reason your air conditioning on, get some water in there because that's going to be probably your biggest issue is dehydration, getting up to 90. Getting down below 65 probably isn't going to kill them for a short period, but if you're below 65 every day, they're going to stop eating, their metabolisms are going to slow down too much, and it's just not good for them, and they will probably eventually die. Any other questions? All right, next one we're going to talk about is millipedes. Millipedes, a lot of people don't know this. Oak has been found something in oak leaves and oak wood that millipedes love. It keeps them alive. I used to, a long time ago, we didn't know that. We didn't put oak inside of our substrate, and we would lose millipedes a lot more often than we do now. Now we almost never have a millipede death. Usually it's an old age issue or some other weird disease that they got. It's the only reason we lose a millipede. You want a substrate that's mixed usually with the ground cocoa, some rotting oak leaves, and calcium. You actually mix the calcium inside their substrate. It gets on the stuff they're eating. It gets on the leaves and stuff. That'll keep your millipede very healthy. Millipedes love fruits and vegetables. Zucchini, cucumbers, pumpkin. They really love watermelon, apples. No citrus. You don't want to feed millipedes citrus. It'll actually burn them, and I learned that one the hard way once. Once again, temperatures for all your bugs about the same. Millipedes really like their substrate moist, not wet, not where you can even see the water, just a nice color, sort of what these guys up here up front have. Yes?
Could you address the mites on millipedes?
Okay, that's actually why the giant African millipedes have been banned from import, is that somebody said that they did a study where the mites on the African millipedes could eat this one kind of bulb, and they only would do it if they had no other choice. So USDA thought, oh, well, because they eat this one kind of bulb, they could eat something else. So they banned African giants from being imported. The mite on them usually only stays on the millipede. It eats bacteria and stuff around the legs. It's some people call them cleaner mites. They don't really harm your millipede at all. In fact, a lot of people believe that they're good for your millipede. They actually keep your millipede clean and help stave off bacteria.
The bulb? What kind of, like a flower bulb?
Yeah, it was a flower bulb of some kind. They did it over in Europe, and our USDA found out and decided, oh, you know what, maybe we should ban those from being imported because if that mite gets out and starts eating our plants or something. Not a lot of research done there. A lot of times they'll just do that. It's easier for them to ban it now, maybe research it later, but just to be safe. They're still available in the hobby. You only can get captive breds now. Anybody selling them needs to get permits to ship them across state lines. I have permits for, you have to apply for one for every state in the U.S. It was very laborsome. And I'm about to move, so I'm going to have to reapply for all of them in every state of the U.S. because I'm shipping them from a different state. But that's why they were banned, is because of that mite. It's kind of silly because even the captive breds have that mite, but I'm not going to argue with them because I want to keep selling African giants. Yes?
You had mentioned apples. Apple seeds are poisonous to many creatures.
I actually don't know. I've never worried about apple seeds. I've never noticed them dying from apple seeds, but I don't think they eat them either. I think they just leave them alone. That might be something that they just know not to eat. A lot of times the core isn't fully eaten, and we'll just take the core out and throw something in there. Also, another thing is if some of your fruits or vegetables that are in there are rotting, it's not a big deal. It's not like your other animals where you need to take out any rotting food. Rotting food is what they actually eat in the wild. They eat rotting vegetation on the ground a lot of times. They're scavengers. They'll even eat meats and proteins and stuff that are on the ground. Meat needs to get their proteins. But yeah, they're scavengers, so you don't have to worry if there's a little bit of mold growing in there. They'll actually even eat some of that mold and stuff. So, anybody else? All right. The last one I was going to talk about is roaches. You've got pretty much two kinds of roaches. You got your burrowers and you got your non-burrowers. Your burrowers like some deep substrate. They usually like more moisture. We do the same thing with the roaches that we do with the millipedes. We mix oak into their substrate. It's good for them too. They'll eat that. When you forget to feed them one day, they can eat some of the oak stuff, and it's really good for them. We keep all of our burrowing roaches semi-moist. All of our non-burrowing roaches we actually keep dry. We'll offer them water crystals, which seems to be a cleaner way to do it, or you can give them an actual water bowl. If you're going to give them a water bowl, we recommend putting rocks or something in there so they don't get in, can't get out, and drown. Other than that, they like fruits and vegetables. Don't give them cucumbers. Well, actually, mainly hissers don't get cucumbers. The other roaches tend to be okay with those. And usually anything that's kind of weird, like an eggplant or something like that, we don't give it to them because there's a few of those things. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. But some of the weird fruits and vegetables that you just don't normally see at your grocery store or are an odd thing like an eggplant are actually poisonous to some of them. Next, I was going to go over some of the illegal bugs, because a lot of people don't realize some of the bugs they have are illegal, or it's illegal to even ship them over there. Most of your beetles are actually legal. There's a few types of beetles that you can have as pets. Darkling beetles. What falls into darkling beetles are your mealworms. Those turn into darkling beetles. The stink bugs that you find around your house, the big black stink bugs sometimes, those fall under darkling beetles. I brought some blue death feigning beetles today to show people after the speech. These are all legal beetles to have in most states, but be careful because USDA actually watches anybody with beetles, walking sticks, even exotic mantis are all illegal to have, and if the USDA sees that you have them, they'll come and take them away from you. Yes?
You said that they watch you. Can you go over that?
Usually,
are we talking like
posting on the boards?
Okay.
They actually do watch the boards. I've actually been told specifically when I had an investigation of my shop, an inspection of my shop. I said, "Hey, how did y'all even know?" And they're like, "Oh, we saw you on the board, and we came over. They told us to come over and check you out." So they do look at the boards sometimes. They're not total idiots. They do know what a computer is, and they are aware that our hobby exists. Yes.
Are flower beetles, what do they call them?
I'm not sure the legality of those. You will see some bugs being sold at shows that just aren't legal. It's actually a learning process for me even. There's no list that says, here's all your legal bugs. There is no list. They don't even have a list of here's all your illegal bugs. They're very secretive. It's very hard to get these lists from them. They'll just tell you, you call them up and you ask them about a bug. They'll punch it into their little computer. They're like, oh yeah, that one's a level D, which means it's still legal, but it's like a minor pest.
Do they even use scientifics on these what you can find as illegal, or is it just ambiguous that they call it a common name and multiple species can fall under it?
Usually it's a blanket, like all walking sticks are illegal, except for a native. If it's a native to where you live, then you can actually carry it and sell it. I'm trying to get northern walking sticks breeding because those are found in a ton of states in the U.S. And once again, I can sell them legally, but that's actually one of the very few walking sticks that I know of that is legal, semi-legal. There's some states that still don't allow them. And yeah, I mean, most of the laws are just blanket. You can't have any exotic mantis. That's how it's worded. An exotic is pretty much not your Chinese or your European mantis. If it's not those two, it's pretty much considered an exotic. So anytime you see walking sticks, even at the museum sometimes, even some of those aren't under permit. Because you're supposed to have a special HVAC system and a huge thing. Because I was actually looking at getting the permits. It would have cost me about a $30,000 building to be able to have walking sticks.
Is it just the check to crops and agriculture?
Yeah, the general rule for your illegal bugs is if it eats plants, it's illegal. If it eats other bugs, it's legal. That's the general rule. I mean, there's some that cross over like millipedes and roaches. They've approved some of those. Most of your roaches are actually legal too. There's just some that they've approved, like hissing roaches and dubia roaches, but for us all to have. And usually the way something gets approved is you would have to request it from the USDA to get approved. They would put in a form that says, hey, we need to do an analysis of this. They only do so many analysis a year. So if yours gets picked, you're really lucky. But they'll do an analysis, and if they find that's not a threat, then they'll go ahead and legalize it. So. Anybody else? Yes?
No, why are they illegal?
Just the fear of them eating agriculture. It's usually agricultural reasons. Almost all of USDA is almost always agricultural. There are some fish and wildlife rules for certain things. And it's usually to protect animals when it comes from fish and wildlife. Anybody else? All right. Well, next thing I was going to cover is ant control. A lot of people ask me, how do I keep my ants out of the cages? I've found two ways to control ants, and they work on a few different kinds of ants. Double-sided tape is the most humane and easy. Put double-sided tape around the corners of the legs of your chairs or around a shelf. That usually does it, at least for a while. I've actually stopped a full invasion by putting it in the middle of an invasion, and they didn't come back. Another way is borax and sugar water. You mix those together. The ants, a lot of times, will keep drinking that and dying off, and they'll stop coming in that direction because they're not returning and making the scent that they need to keep following. Yes?
Peppermint essential oil.
Yes, that actually works too, but that tends to dissipate, and it's a temporary
My kids
fix.
count and I wipe it all the time. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I found with that. That is, it works great, but it dissipates over time. Okay, some people ask me how to do packing. One thing you gotta remember is bugs are not as soft as you think. You want to give them padding anytime you pack in any of your bugs, because you don't want to kill them from bouncing around too much or anything. But the biggest ones are the tarantulas. The tarantulas are really soft. All your other ones tend to be fine. I hardly ever lose anything because it busted in shipping. I've seen people actually even ship T blondies to me like this, just like this, whole package of them, 20 of them, and I mean every one of them's still alive, so you can see that they're usually not going to bust. But when you're packing, one thing I always recommend is use toilet paper, cover all the sides in toilet paper so you have like a little nice padded cell. Some people go, well, how do I get it into that container now that I've got toilet paper on there? A good way is to maybe cup it. You got the toilet paper in there, maybe cup the animal, scoop the lid under. It's okay that the lid might not have some toilet paper, you can maybe even slip some under there. And it's alright if there's a little bit of room in there. If it's a really big fat tarantula, it's better not to have much room, but I recommend not even shipping it if it's that big and fat, because I don't like to ship them either. Yes?
We were talking about it the other day, and you said bust, and I wasn't really clear on that. Can you go over what that actually entails?
Well,
I think you would said
means
explode.
that the FedEx guy, he gets your package, he doesn't care what's in there, he's in a hurry, he throws the thing against the wall over there that lands into a bucket, and the tarantula literally pops. I mean, its abdomen is big and it hits up against the side, and that was too much force trauma for it. It actually pops the tarantula, and that's what the padding is supposed to try to help with. Most of your other bugs, you drop a hisser from 10 feet, ain't going to do anything to it. You drop, even a scorpion usually isn't going to, unless it's a big fat scorpion, it's just going to be mad at you and want to sting you for doing it, but it's not going to usually kill it. Anybody have any questions on packing or tried to pack something and don't? Yes.
Do you take any extra measures with any of your large organs or LPs or anything?
Well, our packing is pretty fail-safe anyways. Our stuff goes into a tube, it gets a lid. Has that lid ever popped? Yes. I've had a customer tell me that the lid popped in shipping somehow. But it gets a lid. That taping those closed is not a bad idea, so that that can't come off. That goes inside of an ice chest. We use real shipping ice chest. This is an example of our shipping. It comes with a real lid. It's not even the inserts. So it's not, I mean, once that scorpion's in that container, wrapped in newspaper inside of this styrofoam container, then that's sealed. And then it's sealed in a box. You'd have to practically run it over with a car to get it out of there. I've never had a package get to a customer open in any way. I've had a customer tell me it's really beat up and it's got this big chunk out of one side or the other, but it's never been to where the scorpion could have gotten out.
Have you ever had any shipments yourself where it's kind of scary opening it because there's bottles that are open in there?
I've actually had a package sitting in my living room once. Been there for about 3 hours. My wife's sitting there and she sees a centipede crawl off the side. She's like, "Oh, kid, we got a problem." There ended up being 5 containers in there that have nothing in them. We don't know what happened to them. We searched the house, couldn't find them. Luckily, there's centipedes that weren't super hot, but still, it's just not fun having a bug that can bite you running around your house. Anybody else? All right. Next thing I was going to go over is importing. A lot of people ask me about getting things from other countries. You're not allowed to ship things from other countries into the U.S. This goes for the reptiles too, actually. I'm sure it's very similar importing reptiles as bugs. There's actually a process you can go through for importing. You can go, if you're just getting 1 or 2, you can go with the PET process. It's really expensive, so probably nobody's going to ever want to do that. If you ever want to try an import where you're going to import some reptiles or bugs, it's a lengthy process where you need to get a broker, you got to get an import license, and you've got to fill out a bunch of paperwork. If you do it all, an import usually costs about $400 to $500 plus the plane ticket from another country. Plane ticket can range from $400 to I've seen $1,200. So a lot of people ask, well, why is it so hard? Why are the animals so expensive when they come from overseas? And that's why. Before I even buy an animal, it's going to cost about $1,000 to $1,200. And then I still have to buy the animals on top of that. Yes?
What do you think would be a good cage for a Chinese mantis?
A Chinese mantis, you're going to want ventilation and something you can climb on. And they really like humidity for shedding. So you're going to want to mist them. Chinese mantis take a little more care than a tarantula or scorpion, and you're going to want to mist them every other day. So a fully screened cage, and that you mist every other day, that would probably be a great environment for your Chinese mantis. Any other questions on?
Is there a large black market for like more exotic insects from other countries and beetles and stuff like that? Or?
I actually don't know that much about that market. If you're talking about live bugs, it's not a huge one. There's a small, very, very, very small market of people doing illegal live bugs. Their walking sticks is probably one of the biggest ones that's traded under the table. A lot of people like have the clay specters and stuff, and those are sold and traded not out in public. But most of your really exotic beetles and stuff, not very often. A lot of things like beetles don't live very long either, so that actually brings that trade. It makes that trade a lot harder. So, anything else on importing? Yes.
I've seen tarantulas where that looks like they're filled with silicone and they're kind of displayed or whatever. Is that what that is? Basically, is that how they're doing it? Do you have any idea what we're talking about? Glass cases. Just spread out like that.
Okay, that's usually probably done with either freeze drying or just natural drying out in the sun. The way they keep their abdomens from collapsing, I understand, is a lot of times injecting it with glue or something like that. But you spread it out in the position you want. I had a freeze dryer that I could actually do this with. It'll freeze it super, super cold, and then as it warms up slowly, it actually pulls all the moisture out of the animal. But because it's frozen, it keeps that position and nothing collapses or anything. And by the time it gets unfrozen, it's already completely dry. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a few days for the freeze dryer to do that, and the larger the animal, the longer it takes.
Did you do that with other, did you do that with birds and stuff?
Would do it with what?
Did you do it with like snakes and stuff?
Absolutely. A lot of people do that actually. You can do cats, you can do dogs, you can do anything. It's almost like taxidermy, just a different way of doing it. You know,
Everything's inside it, then it's just
right. Well, I think if you were going to do a large animal like a cat or a dog, then you'd probably debowel it and then go from there, because it's going to take a really long time if it has that much liquid inside of it. I haven't done freeze drying myself. It's just I have a freeze dryer. I plan to do it, and I've done some reading on it. That's the only reason I know that's what stuff's done. Okay, next I was going to talk about some of the problems with the bug hobby. Some of our biggest problems and my fears of what's coming up is shipping is becoming a bigger and bigger problem for all hobbyists. USPS is actually starting to notice people shipping through the mail. I've had 2 people ship me stuff, and they've had USPS give them a call and say, hey, you can't do this. One of the guys actually says he's got a charge against him, and they called it contraband. I don't know how that works with the law or anything, but he actually got some kind of charge against him for shipping tarantulas in the mail. The reason is they're venomous. Anything venomous can't be shipped to them. Spiders, scorpions, any of that stuff. Millipedes, great. The hissing roaches, great. You can actually ship those through any carrier pretty much. But when it comes to tarantulas, there is no legal way on the USPS end, or FedEx and UPS, actually it's against their rules. So one of my biggest fears is coming up is they're starting to notice us more. They're realizing we're shipping through them, and they're going to start watching all of our packages more, and what we're going to do next when that happens. I don't know. I've tried to start a lobby to get USPS to legalize it. Trying to get them to do anything is a huge fight, just like with any government organization. They won't even give me a person over there to talk to. They just like, well, it's on the table. There's nobody here to talk to. Once we get to it, we'll get to it. And I've been pushing for that. But that's one of my biggest fears of that. Another one is people doing illegal trade and bringing our hobby into a bad spotlight. If somebody does illegal importing that, you know, they end up getting caught, it brings a lot of bad press to our hobby. A lot of people think, you know, bugs are scary already, and then they see them in the news, and they find out we're all keeping them, and it's brought in this bad light that they were smuggling them in. Then in their eyes, we're all smuggling bugs in, and we're getting all these weird exotic things that we shouldn't have. And the more that comes to light, the less of the bigger threat to our hobby that they do start doing something and not allowing us to have these things. Another big threat that I could see in our hobby is release into the wild. Some people, they get bugs. I've had even people that, you know, buy them to make a movie or something, and they say, hey, can I let these go in my backyard, you know? And I'm like, gosh, no, please do not let those go in your backyard, because if for some reason they do start getting a population, let's say a new tarantula pops up in California that doesn't belong there, that's when all of a sudden they will start slapping on different rules and not allow us to keep selling our bugs. Last thing I was going to talk about was wild caught versus captive bred. A lot of people, you know, think wild caughts are horrible. They're against collecting it all. And one thing I really came to grips with it this summer when I was out collecting myself. And I was sitting in a spot, and within a 100-foot area, I'd collected 200 dune scorpions. And then I looked around and I thought, wow, I could do this for 100 years and never even dent the populations here. Every direction for hundreds and hundreds of miles was the exact same environment that I was walking in. Is this for all bugs? No. If you go find a microclimate, a bug in a cave, don't touch it, because that's something that it's got a little tiny microclimate. But usually when you're getting a wild-caught bug, it's because they're out there in great numbers, and they do reproduce in great numbers. There are some things like the emperor scorpion and rose hair that I worry about, because those do come in tens of thousands every year. Nobody collects anything from the U.S. or a lot of these countries in more than maybe a few hundred a year. When it comes to bugs, I don't think captive bred versus wild caught. I don't think there's a huge issue personally. You'll find people differ on that, but I personally don't think it's a huge issue. The biggest thing you're going to come along is wild caught sometimes carry parasites. Sometimes those parasites might even spread to some of your other animals. I think that's where I would say, the captive breds are actually a better deal is when you're worried about that. Do I see a ton of parasites on wild caught stuff? Not really. Sometimes I'll see some weird thing pop out of a T. blondie. It's usually a parasitic wasp or a parasitic fly larva that comes out of them. And sometimes you don't see that for 9 months after it's been in captivity, so it's not something that you can catch right away. So you buy a Team Blondie, there's always the slim possibility that could happen. That doesn't spread though to your other animals, so it's not a huge issue. Nematoids a lot of times come out of the wild. And those can spread to other animals, so you have to watch that. So I think that was about all the things I was going to cover, and if anybody has any questions about bugs at all now, floor is open. Yes?
Yeah, the giant millipede seemed to be a fairly active critter. What size habitat for them?
I would say if you're only going to have one or two, 10-gallon aquarium with maybe 3/4 of it filled with substrate would be perfect for them. Maybe actually about half of it filled with substrate. They like to climb around too. We actually have a cage that's a big octagon. It's about yay high. We've got pieces of cork bark up on the sides. They like to actually sail up that cork bark and up and down. At night they'll just totally cover the whole cage. So they do travel a lot.
No problem whether they're male, female, or how many, or?
Not really. I mean they'll breed if you have both. But as far as mattering, no, they don't fight or anything like that. So as long as you have enough food, they should be fine. Yes.
When we got our some of our slings, like 0.5, and we put them in new little tubs, we had one of them that had a cycle of mold, and it had like the little spores. Is that common, or is that as soon as you see that you need to wipe it and start fresh?
The cycle of mold?
Yeah, like it had like little mold spores on the
cycle of mold.
Yeah.
Always remove mold if it's in
okay.
cages. There's a wood mold that's yellow and it's these little dots, little yellow dots. That's harmless. All your white molds, it's a good idea to get them out of the cage immediately because some of those can harm your tarantulas. In a tarantula cage, any type of something else growing, mushroom, mold, fungus, anything like that, take it out of your tarantula cage. Yes?
Do you ever keep isopods with any of your invertebrates?
I do sometimes. In fact, one of our roaches that was getting really dirty and it's really hard to clean because they're a burrower and some of them are really tiny and they're just all through the substrate. We got isopods in there to help clean the substrate. They actually eat the molds and fungus and stuff that grows in there, and even some of the poo and stuff from the roaches, so it helps to clean the substrate. I've got a colony, and it's kind of nice for me because now I've got a colony of those going inside that container too that I can also sell. But yeah, they're really good. Isopods actually really like moisture too, so having like a log or something that you set inside that container that will keep moisture underneath it is really a good idea. So if you're going to put isopods in your tarantula cage or something, put a piece of cork bark or log or something in there they can get under and keep some moisture for them.
What variety do you prefer?
I prefer just the gray normal isopods because they tend to do better and breed better and in the cages. The orange ones are prettier looking, but they're not as hardy. They die a lot easier. So, anybody else? Yes.
What's the trade like in other parts of the world? I know that you mentioned that a lot of stuff can't come into the United States. Are other countries as restrictive as for bugs going to those countries, or are there a lot of trade going on between other countries that don't?
There's only a few countries that do a lot of trade, and I think that this is probably similar to the countries that do reptile trade are pretty much the same ones that are doing bug trading. And there's not a lot of restrictions. I know Australia has a lot of restrictions because they've really had problems with invasive species and stuff. Hawaii, one of our own states, I mean, they've got a huge amount of restrictions. But a lot of these countries actually have less restrictions than we do with stuff coming in. Europe it's easy to get bugs in Europe. It's one of the best places to be a bug enthusiast, if you ask me.
They're not worried about their orchards or their.
Well, I think the main thing with Europe is a lot of it gets so cold in the winter that it kills off a lot of species that could be invasive. I think that's the main reason. I've done a lot of research on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's the main reason they're allowed to have a lot of the exotic stuff that we aren't. Yes? No, it's okay.
Coming from a retail standpoint, with your burrowing roach species, where you have these permanent, semi-permanent enclosures, how are you able to part off these colonies and sell them? Is it just a waiting game of egg crate, or?
You mean getting them out of the substrate? Yeah, we'll literally sift substrate.
And the substrate burrows and whatnot, you just let
They don't have burrows per se. Burrowing roaches is kind of dig through. They don't really make a burrow like a tarantula does. They're burrowing, meaning they just dig, but they just go underneath the top layer of dirt where it's loose, and that's how they hang out.
So I meant the limit of ant farms.
Yeah, no ant farm roaches. Anybody else? Yes.
I did have a question. We were discussing a couple weeks ago about baby slings and also bigger tarantulas using water in water dishes compared to water crystals or like water packets that expand.
Do not use water crystals or water packets for tarantulas. They can't drink it. There's no way for them to get the water out of that. The only two ways to really water your tarantula is either watering the substrate and then suck it out of that. The gel actually holds the water inside the gel, so your animal practically has to eat the gel to get the water out. The tarantulas can't suck the water out of gel crystals. I've had people ask me why their tarantula dried up and died, because they had gel crystals in there the whole time, and that's why, they can't drink from that. So either water the substrate or give them a water dish. If you ever notice your tarantula's legs starting to curl under, 90% of the time, it's because they're dehydrated. And what you can do is you can take their mouth, stick it in the water. You're not going to suffocate them. Their book lungs are down below, not where their mouth is, and they're going to be able to get a drink of water that way. There's plenty of times we've done that. Pretty much put their head in it so they can get the water. Yes?
A friend of mine was holding one of my tarantulas the other day. He was holding it, one of his legs just fell off.
Fell off?
Yeah,
We're still twitching.
Yeah, I've heard of that before. I've never had it happen to me. It could be a disease of some kind, or it could be that it was damaged, you just didn't realize it, and something caused it to finish coming off.
Do they regenerate?
Yes. When they shed, usually the first time they shed, the leg will be smaller than all the other legs. It'll still be a full leg. It'll just be skinnier and a little shorter. The second time they shed after that, usually it's a full leg again. But it usually takes two legs. Almost all your bugs do that same thing. They lose an antenna or leg or whatever. They usually
Seems really healthy, and you just walk along his hand, it just fell off.
I'm guessing that it probably was already off, like just barely connected somehow, and it just came off from a certain motion or something. That's another thing, actually. Some people have asked me before: is their tarantulas bleeding because of a leg falling off or something? Or what do you do about it? Something recently that I have not experimented with myself that I learned is that you can actually use cornstarch and water to stop the bleeding in the tarantula. What we've always done in the past is use a very small amount of super glue. That's to seal a wound. That's tend to work okay, but cornstarch seems a little bit less harsh than super glue. So that's definitely what we're going to start trying, because I've heard that actually has really good results.
Yeah. Okay, I have a few questions.
Okay.
You've been getting from people. You say shed and not bolt. Is there a difference? I'm curious.
I hate to even say, because I actually don't. I've heard it both ways for so long that I've never even researched if there's an actual thing you need to say it this way. I want to say that it is molt is the correct, and that shed is usually more like what a reptile does. But I'm pretty sure molt is the correct term. Do you have another question?
That was it for right now.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to English first.
Yes.
Once in a while in this area, and I don't know enough about beetles and their names or what they are, but once in a while you see something that's really cool. There's a beetle that's sort of a brown and white stripe,
Right.
relatively large. There's another one with big antlers that come off of them, some type of wood beetle or such. If you were to collect a few of these things, could you actually breed these things and keep colonies, or?
You can breed, beetles are really hard to breed usually, unless they're like the darkening beetles, which, you know, are mealworms. Most of your beetles, like they for one, they have a really, really long larval state and a very, very short time as a beetle. So they spend most of their life in a larval state. And yes, you can breed them, but it's going to take you 2 years to get your next generation, and you just waiting for this worm to finally turn into a beetle. And you have to like be there at the right times. Like I tried to do fig beetles, and they all turned into their cocoons. They're going to be turning into beetles, but it's going to take up to 6 months, from 3 to 6 months. I put them in the dark in the closet. About 6 months later, I was like, oh, my beetles. I ran in there and looked, they'd all hatched and they'd all died before I even had a chance to play with them. So yeah, you can breed beetles, but it's very hard. It takes research, and each one is different to how you would do it. And beetles being illegal to sell, there's not a ton of research in the care of them either, so in captivity.
I've seen some really cool stuff coming from Southeast Asia. There you can go to flea markets and they'll sell these green metallic beetles that they put thread around and they fly around. You got them on a leash. And then they lay Easter colored eggs. You know, just really cool stuff. And then
Yeah, I wish we could have more beetles here in the U.S., but once again, it's the agricultural side of things. They don't want them killing our oak trees or our corns or you know, anything that has to do with agriculture. And they don't know what they're going to affect or what they're going to end up eating here if they got out. Yes.
Do you have any stag beetles?
I do not have any stag beetles. Those are, once again, one of those kind of beetles that you can't ship across state lines. And a lot of states actually have them as an illegal bug to have. So. Anybody else? Yes.
same with butterflies.
There's actually a few approved butterflies. Butterflies are really easy to find. If you want to go on the internet and use butterfly pet or anything like that, they've got full kits for you to do butterflies. There's companies that their whole company is just based around selling live butterflies and live butterfly kits. So that's one reason we've never touched them is there's already companies that just do that. You know, so it's much easier to just go buy from them. You're gonna get it from them from cheaper, and it's a whole another mess of stuff that you have to do to keep butterflies breeding and alive and stuff. So. Yeah. Sometimes we'll pick some up from them wholesale to sell at shows that we're going to do, but that's about it. We don't have some.
And with the butterflies, are those also the ones that are indigenous to the U.S., or do you see the exotics? Are they allowed sort of
I
exotics?
believe the only ones that are legal are indigenous to the U.S. I know the what's it called? Blanking on the name. Oh, I got your answer for that. Sand, grog. It's called grog, is what you can get from the pottery shop that you can mix with your sand so that your scorpions can burrow and the burrows do not collapse.
Is it partially fired already?
I believe, I don't think so. I think it's actually just literally a mud that's been turned into kind of like a sand and dried and then, you know, ground down to be like sandy. Then when you mix it with just a little bit of regular sand, it's hard enough to hold its shape when they dig in it and it doesn't collapse on them. Yes?
Alright, your favorite tarantula species, scorpion species, or roach species?
I get asked that question all the time. The problem is I can give you about 10 tarantulas that are my favorite species for this reason, for a different reason on each. Versicolors are really pretty. From babies to adults, they totally change. Chocolate golden knees, one of the friendliest tarantulas I've ever seen. Hardly ever find one that's mean. Losiodora parabana, really cheap and hardy, and it gets monstrous. Vermicticus cancerides, they love to move their home around all the time, so they're a very active tarantula, constantly moving dirt from one side to the other. I can keep going like this for, there's no real favorite when it comes to tarantulas because there's so many neat things that each of them can do, and each of them is so different than the other kinds. Roach species, domino roaches are one of my favorites because of color. They really need colors. Scorpion species, once again, it's sort of like the tarantulas. There's so many different kinds and so many different reasons. If you want a really nice one, get an emperor. If you want one that's going to dig massive holes, the desert hairy is really cool. It'll dig really deep tunnels and intricate tunnels for you. So it's hard for me to say which one's favorite. One of my favorite bugs, period, would probably be the tailless whip scorpion. I don't know if we can see that on this camera here. These guys look like aliens. You've seen them in things like Harry Potter. They're harmless. It can't sting you. It can't bite you. It just looks really crazy. After the speech, if y'all want to come up and look at it, y'all can take a look at them. But they look alien, and the fact that they're harmless is just a really neat bug to have around. Yes?
Do you collect your own bugs, or do you buy them from other people?
All of the above. I have people from other places call me up, hey, Ken, I got some of these. I collect them myself. I have breeders call me up that breed stuff. I import stuff from other countries that's captive bred. I import stuff from other countries that's not captive bred. I buy stuff from even reptile dealers sometimes that import some bugs with their reptiles. So I've got a large array of ways I get my bugs, actually.
Tips on a really aggressive tarantula, like how to put it in your tank or just
how to manipulate them to go where you want them to go. The biggest thing I've found, the easiest way to do it is with delis and long tweezers. Cupping a really aggressive tarantula that's got its hands up in the air like this, if you can, just get something to grab the container and cup it, and then slide a lid up underneath it. That's the easiest way to get an aggressive tarantula out of its cage, so you can do what you need to do. Get it back in there. Take that lid off very nicely. Then I'd use tweezers just to pull off the deli and let it do its thing after that. But
I started using my snake hook to move some things around the tank, and it ran up the snake hook.
Oh yeah, some of them. Yeah, it's best to couple them if you can. I mean, and if this is too small because your tarantula's big, couple them that way. I mean, there's lots of ways to cup a tarantula. Just get a bigger container to cup it with that you're more comfortable doing it with. I definitely recommend use a see-through container. The simple fact is you can see what's going on underneath the container, and you don't hurt your tarantula trying to get the lid up underneath there. But that's been the easiest way to do it. Over time, we've just gotten used to how they're going to move and what they're going to do. So a lot of times we just use our tweezers and stuff. And every once in a while, something will go running on us, and we'll freak out for a second because you got a pokey or a cobalt running across your lap. I don't care who you are, you're going to be a little scared. Anybody else? Yes. You can go first.
What is one of your more elaborate web building tarantulas?
OBTs or orange starburst tarantulas. Those guys really web up. Cobalt blues. A lot of times, actually, if you give them a smaller cage, a little smaller than you think is quite comfortable, they'll web the whole cage. So the whole thing will just be one big web that they travel through. So I would say critter keeper about this size for a full-grown OBT, and they'll go crazy on the web. I mean, the whole thing will be webbed up as one big web. Yep, orange body thing. You have a question?
Favorite species of tarantula to deal with?
Least favorite? Oh, to handle and deal with.
Container, feeding.
It used to be the blondie because I actually couldn't keep them alive very well. I realized what we were doing wrong is that species, out of all species of tarantulas, really required humidity. If you let your blondies dry out for even a day, sometimes it'll kill them. That was my least favorite for a long time, but we fixed that. We figured out what we were doing wrong, and now we don't have a problem with them. But I really don't have a least favorite because it's not that hard for me to deal with any of them anymore. I hate getting Cambridges, and I hate getting Tapecinus, the Tapecinus species that I do really bad with, so I just don't buy them anymore.
Those are tree spiders, right?
Yeah, Tapecinus gigas. Those, every time I've gotten babies of those, I end up killing them, so I just don't get them anymore because I don't like killing bugs either. But that's the only reasons I don't like a couple things is because I can't take care of them well enough. Yes?
hope you haven't already answered this question, but
That's all
my
right.
neighbor had a desert hairy scorpion. It had a whole bunch of little scorpions, and he didn't know what to do with them. He lost them all. You got any good suggestions if that ever happens again?
If anybody ever has any bug that you don't want, you can always send it to me. I'll take it. That's pretty much it. I mean, I get people that, I got all these baby roaches, I don't want to send them over here. I'll take them. Because I mean, do not let them go outside no matter what you do. As bad as this may sound, I'd rather you freeze them and kill them somehow than let them go in your backyard. Because it is not a good thing to let them go. Sometimes you can actually infect other bugs with certain things that were in your collection that you didn't realize. Or you can actually get something breeding in your area that shouldn't be there, and that'll end up affecting other animals or bugs in the area too. So it's not a good idea to ever let a bug go or let one get out if you can control it. Yes.
Okay, you just said send them to you.
Yep.
Are you in Reno?
I'm not in Reno, but you can always use my FedEx account to send it to me.
Okay, so that you can ship scorpions FedEx.
Yes. Well, not technically, no.
I know.
No shipping service allows you to ship any of the venomous bugs. FedEx knows good and well what I'm doing. I do enough shipping that letting me go because I ship bugs is worse for them than to just look the other way and pretend like they don't know. They're very aware that I'm shipping when I'm shipping them. I tell them live harmless bugs. They walk into my shop every day and see the tarantulas. They see what's on my website. They know what I'm shipping. But if you're going to go with the service and you're afraid of getting in trouble, use either FedEx or UPS. Don't tell them what you're shipping because they'll tell you you can't. Worst case they're going to do, unless it gets out and stings somebody, because then they can sue you. But if it doesn't, if you got it packed well, it's not going to get out or anything. Worst thing that FedEx or UPS is going to do is give you a call and say, hey, you can't ship these, you need to come back and get them. USPS, they have the option of prosecuting you if they feel like it. So you got to be careful of that. Nobody but the one guy lately that has told me that is happening. He's the only person I've ever heard of getting prosecuted for shipping bugs through USPS. So far it's not a big issue, but if you're worried about it, use FedEx or UPS.
Cool, Ken, let's do one more question.
Yes.
I just want to know what's your most expensive bug?
Probably the P. Metallica. Yeah, it's, those guys are the big giant female, $700.
Yeah.
Nice.
One last question. He'll be here for another.
Yeah. Y'all can all walk up and ask me questions too.
P. Metallica?
Do you look into true spiders?
I do actually. My favorite true spider, I can give you my favorite true spider, is a fishing spider. They're really awesome. They get big like this. They're natives. They're actually from Florida is where I get them. They're Okefenokee. Philommedes okefenokee is its scientific name. You get a container like this. You fill it up with water. Give them wooden stuff around it, and put a goldfish in there. When he gets hungry, he'll actually go up to the water and put his foot in there. The goldfish comes up to eat his foot, thinking it's some kind of food or something. He'll grab that goldfish up out of there and eat it. If you can't get a hold of the goldfish every week, they will eat crickets too. So that's the neat thing about them is you don't have to feed them goldfish. Just feed them goldfish is the cool part. All right. Well, thank you everybody, and hopefully I didn't bore you all too much.